The thin ribs of the hospital water cup bent under my thumb. Ice knocked against the plastic in time with the telemetry monitor. Beep, tap, beep, tap. Across the bed, Evangeline Moore sat in the cream cardigan, buttoned high over a pale blouse. Her phone buried inside her tote instead of attached to her hand. That was the first detail that did not belong. The second was the way she kept watching the cup. "You collapsed in hangar 4, she said. Her voice was controlled, but her thumbnail pressed into the side of her index finger. I loosened my grip before the cup split. 30 hours earlier, I had entered the aft fuselage of a damaged regional jet with 2 inspection lamps, a thermal camera, and a team that had already been awake too long. The hangar ventilation had been tagged for repair, but the work order had been delayed. Heat from the afternoon tarmac rolled through the open bay. The auxiliary power unit kept feeding warm exhaust toward the aircraft, and the fuselage trapped it. I remembered the air turning metallic. I remembered kneeling beside the pressure bulkhead. Then, nothing. Adrian said you dropped beside the rear service door. Evangeline continued. Your core temperature was above 104. You were severely dehydrated, and the ER documented exertional heat illness with transient syncope. Adrian Cole was my team lead. If he had called her from the ambulance, he had used the emergency card in my field file. I looked at the telemetry leads fixed to my chest. How long was I unconscious? Less than a minute. The brief pause in your breathing happened during the fainting episode. Dr. Patel called it syncopal apnea and noted that it did not recur. That answered the medical question. It did not answer why Evangeline was here instead of at the Horizon Airlines merger briefing that had consumed her life for 6 months. You should be downtown. I said, Horizon has 3 deputy directors and a 90-page crisis plan. You wrote the plan, which is why they can use it without me. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and warmed plastic. A transport cart rattled past the open door. Evangeline reached for the cup. May I? I handed it over. She set it in the center of the rolling tray and unfolded a document from her tote. Your agency placed you on temporary field suspension pending occupational health review. Marcus Vale signed the notice. The name tightened the muscles between my shoulders. Marcus chaired regional operational oversight. He had approved the request to defer the Hangar 4 ventilation repair until the end of the quarter. If my collapse became an environmental exposure case, the internal audit would follow his signature from the delayed work order to the 30-hour deployment schedule. If he classified it as chronic medical incapacity, the hangar became irrelevant. What authority does he have? I asked. He can recommend suspension of your field deployment qualification and refer you to the occupational health panel. He cannot make the final fitness decision, but he can shape the record they receive. Yes. She placed a second paper beside the notice. This is a limited communications authorization. It allows me to organize correspondence, prepare chronology, and speak with the agency's public affairs office. It does not let me make medical decisions or act as your attorney. Who handles the employment review? Miriam Shah, Federal Employment Council. She is joining by video at 9. The structure was clean. Evangeline was here because I had named her as my emergency contact years ago. After a press conference where she discovered I had listed an agency switchboard that no longer existed. Her communications role was written. Her limits were written. She could leave at any time. I could revoke the authorization at any time. No debt hidden inside care. A nurse entered to check the IV line. Hydration first, she said. Arguments second. I wasn't arguing. Evangeline looked at her. He always says that while arguing. The nurse smiled and handed her a fresh ribbed cup. Evangeline held it out to me. I drank. By 9, the hospital room had become a temporary command station. My encrypted agency tablet rested on the blanket across my knees. Evangeline had moved the informational pamphlets from the side table and arranged 3 folders in their place. Blue for medical, gray for hangar records, black for agency correspondence. Miriam Shah appeared on the tablet screen from an office lined with legal books. Investigator Ward. She said the agency may temporarily restrict field deployment while it evaluates safety. It may not manufacture a chronic condition to avoid investigating workplace exposure. Marcus will say the collapse proves I cannot tolerate field stress. Then we separate cause from risk. Miriam replied, cause, extreme heat, dehydration, excessive duty hours. Risk, whether you can safely return under corrected conditions. Different questions. Evangeline opened the gray folder. We need the hangar 4 temperature history, the ventilation work order, the shift roster, and the APU operating log. I can build the thermal reconstruction, I said. Miriam nodded. And I will request the maintenance and personnel records through formal channels. Do not access restricted systems from your hospital bed. Evangeline looked at me over the top of her glasses. I was not planning to. You had your tablet open before sunrise. That proves nothing. It proves you require supervision. Miriam's mouth moved as if she was hiding a smile. The first clue arrived before lunch. Adrian sent the team's original shift roster through Miriam. It showed my deployment beginning at 6 a.m. Monday and ending at noon Tuesday. The roster in Marcus's suspension packet showed my shift beginning at 6 p.m. Monday. 12 hours had vanished. The file was altered after the ambulance call. Adrian said on speaker, I printed the original before we entered the fuselage because the digital board kept freezing. Do you still have the printout? Miriam asked. In my field binder. Signed by the safety coordinator. Preserve it. Do not write on it. I'll arrange collection. Evangeline drew a line through the first page of her chronology and rebuilt it around the original roster. No speech about betrayal. One corrected document. One new threat. The second clue came that afternoon. Dr. Priya Patel, the attending physician, entered with my discharge forecast and paused beside the tray. Your agency physician requested a secondary cardiac panel before I finished the heat exposure report, she said. When? Evangeline asked. 38 minutes after admission. Marcus had been building the chronic medical record before the treating doctor had finished documenting the environmental cause. Dr. Patel continued. Your initial echocardiogram shows a minor mitral valve irregularity. It may be congenital and harmless. I am not clearing you for field deployment today, but nothing in the current study explains the collapse. What testing confirms that? I asked. Repeat echocardiogram after hydration, exercise stress testing, and possibly a short Holter monitor. An independent cardiologist should issue the fitness opinion. Miriam wrote the plan into the appeal file. No miracle diagnosis. A process. When the call ended, Evangeline stood and removed only her left shoe before returning to the chair. You always do that when legal language annoys you, I said. She looked down at the bare foot. I do not. You did it during the coastal air inquiry. That room had terrible carpet. And the freight liability mediation? Worse carpet. I touched the edge of her cardigan sleeve with 2 fingers instead of taking her hand. The wool was familiar. 2 years earlier, after her father's funeral, I had stood at the back of the church and solved whatever small problems appeared because grief had already given her enough. Parking, caterer invoices, black coffee when her knee stopped cooperating. She looked at my fingers against the sleeve. Then she rested her forearm beside them on the bed rail. The telemetry monitor continued its steady count. Week 1 ended with my discharge from the hospital and a temporary field suspension. Dr. Patel wrote the diagnosis plainly: exertional heat illness with dehydration and transient syncope after prolonged duty in extreme heat. The agency occupational health unit scheduled an intake for the following Monday. Evangeline drove me home. She carried my hospital blanket because I forgot it on the chair. I carried the final ribbed water cup because my hand had closed around it before I noticed. At my apartment, she placed the folded blanket over the arm of the sofa and set the cup beside the sink. I can call Miriam and leave, she said. The communications authorization does not require me to stay here. You have Horizon. I also have remote access. That was not my question. She opened her tote and placed the signed authorization on the kitchen island. You decide whether I continue. I looked at the 3 folders, the water cup, and the black coffee she had bought on the drive. Continue through the preliminary appeal. Agreed. She opened her laptop. Week 2 belonged to medical facts. Dr. Mayomi Chen, an independent cardiologist, repeated the echocardiogram after my hydration normalized. She ordered an exercise stress test and 48-hour Holter monitoring. Evangeline attended the first appointment only after I invited her. During the stress test, she sat behind the glass with her phone face down. Dr. Chen increased the treadmill incline. My heart rate rose. The mitral finding remained mild and stable. No dangerous rhythm appeared. The Holter monitor later showed occasional benign beats, nothing that explained the collapse or disqualified field duty. At the end of the week, Dr. Chen wrote a preliminary opinion. The valve irregularity was non-symptomatic. Return to fieldwork would depend on corrected environmental exposure, duty hour limits, hydration protocol, and occupational review. Not a blank check, she said. I didn't ask for one. No, but men who investigate crashes often believe their bodies are equipment with replaceable parts. Evangeline sat beside me, cream cardigan folded across her lap. She has noticed that too, I said. I have a file. Dr. Chen signed the report. Third-party evidence. No surprise document arriving at the hearing. Week 3 moved the case back to Hangar 4. I was still prohibited from active field duty, but the agency allowed a supervised site review because the appeal required environmental reconstruction. Industrial hygienist Dr. Lena Park led the inspection. Adrian accompanied us as witness. I wore a heart monitor, carried a hydration pack, and logged each exposure interval. Evangeline did not enter the fuselage. She stood outside the restricted zone with the communications chronology and watched through the open service door. Tool. Deliverable. Arena. I placed calibrated thermal sensors at the rear service compartment, pressure bulkhead access, and central aisle. Lena measured airflow at each vent. Adrian recreated the APU operating schedule from the original deployment. The aft fuselage temperature climbed faster than the agency's preliminary model predicted. At 96 degrees outside, the rear compartment reached 116 within 40 minutes. Air movement stayed below the minimum specified in the maintenance manual. Lena checked the sensor twice. This is not ordinary heat exposure, she said. This is a failed ventilation environment inside a confined metal structure. She certified the readings and sealed the data card. The third clue emerged when Miriam's records request returned without the scheduled HVAC maintenance ticket. The work order index jumped from 8,814 to 8,816. Number 8,815 was missing. Marcus's office claimed the ticket had been canceled before submission. Adrian opened his field binder and removed a printed email. Subject, Hangar 4, ventilation, defer to Q4. The approval line carried Marcus's name. Evangeline did not celebrate. She photographed the document under Miriam's preservation protocol, then updated the chronology. Missing ticket, she said. Altered shift log. Early cardiac request. The pieces pointed in one direction, but the motive still required proof. Why was Marcus risking a falsified medical narrative instead of admitting a maintenance delay? The answers stayed open. After the site review, I reached for the hydration pack before Evangeline could remind me. She noticed, "You followed the schedule." It was in the plan. Plans do not usually survive contact with you. That is an unfair summary of aviation investigation. It is an accurate summary of your lunch habits. Adrian pretended not to hear us. Relief after evidence. A small laugh beside the hangar where I had collapsed. Before week 4, the hospital released one more record. Dr. Patel documented heat illness at 3:18 p.m. Marcus's office had requested a secondary cardiac panel at 2:47 before her report existed, using the phrase possible chronic exertional intolerance. Miriam called. This proves sequence, not motive. Adrian supplied the missing link, an email warning that Hangar 4 ventilation could not be deferred through summer. Marcus replied that the repair would damage his regional performance review and ordered portable fans until the next quarter. The fans were never delivered. Evangeline printed the chain and placed it beneath the altered roster. Her left shoe rested under my kitchen stool. No carpet. I said, "Read the email." If the heat finding stood, the audit led directly to Marcus. I reached for my empty mug. Evangeline had already set a full water bottle beside it. The ribbed hospital cup remained dented near the sink. I drank without being reminded. Week 4 brought agency pressure. Marcus circulated an internal note questioning whether my judgment had been impaired before the heat event. 2 colleagues stopped including me on technical calls. One sent a message asking whether I planned to take the safe desk option. I wrote 3 replies and deleted all of them. Evangeline found the tablet face down on my kitchen counter. Responding will feed the story Marcus wants. She said, "I know. You are still angry. I know. Then do something useful with it." I opened the exposure timeline. She placed black coffee beside my right hand, the same order she had held at her father's funeral. The cup was ceramic now, not plastic, but the gesture carried the same weight. That night, Miriam obtained the metadata for the altered shift roster. The file change originated from an oversight office account 2 hours after the ambulance left Hangar 4. Marcus had not merely interpreted the event. His office had changed the record. Miriam filed a preservation demand and requested an inspector general review. The agency granted a temporary order preventing permanent qualification action until the records dispute was resolved. A practical win. Not the end. Week 5 placed Horizon and my appeal on the same calendar. The merger entered final communications review. Evangeline's partners wanted her downtown full-time. She had already missed 3 executive sessions and delegated the press simulation to a deputy. I found her at my kitchen island before sunrise, one left shoe off, reading 2 screens at once. "Go back," I said. "To which crisis?" "Horizon. Miriam can handle the legal side here. You can handle the technical side. And you?" "I can decide where I work." The answer should have satisfied me. It did not. That afternoon, Marcus issued a preliminary recommendation for permanent loss of field deployment qualification and noted that a medical restriction might affect future consulting eligibility. The classification combined my heat collapse with a congenital valve finding. Dr. Chen called it medically unsupported. Marcus called it caution. The agency scheduled the preliminary appeal for week 6. Evangeline received the Horizon Board ultimatum an hour later. Return to headquarters by Monday, or surrender lead communications authority to another director. Her thumbnail pressed into her finger until the skin turned pale. I opened a voluntary federal resignation template. She saw the heading. No, if I resign before the panel acts, the record shows voluntary departure instead of permanent medical disqualification. And Marcus avoids the hangar audit. I retain private consulting options. You abandon the field work you built your life around. I remove his leverage over you. She stood. The chair legs scraped across the tile. My career is not a variable you get to eliminate from your equation. You are losing Horizon because of this case. I am losing time. That is different from losing a career. You cannot know that, and you cannot decide for me. The refrigerator motor stopped. For 3 seconds, neither of us moved. Then I saved the resignation draft. Evangeline closed her laptop. If you submit that without attending the appeal, revoke my authorization first. She folded the cream cardigan over her arm and left. The hospital blanket remained on the sofa. The ribbed cup still sat beside the sink. Before the preliminary appeal, Horizon asked Evangeline to appear on a televised merger panel. I'll attend Monday and return for the appeal Tuesday, she said. My deputy can lead rehearsal. My eyes moved to the resignation template. Do not use competent delegation as evidence that I need rescuing. I aligned the pages instead of answering. She turned the top sheet crooked. Leave one thing that way. I straightened it after she left. Week 6 began without her. Miriam handled the preliminary appeal. Dr. Chen submitted the cardiology findings. Lena Park delivered the environmental report. Adrian authenticated the original shift roster. I presented the thermal reconstruction. The occupational health physician, Dr. Samuel Ortiz, listened without interrupting. Marcus argued that a single collapse under pressure demonstrated unreliable tolerance for field stress. Dr. Ortiz looked at the heat map. 116 degrees inside an unventilated fuselage is not ordinary field stress, he said. The panel granted provisional eligibility for a monitored return, subject to the Inspector General inquiry and a final hearing in week 7. I should have felt relief. Instead, I returned home to the resignation document. The cursor blinked beneath my name. I checked the apartment lock twice, then the hydration schedule on the refrigerator, then the timestamp on the thermal file. The habits gave me tasks, but no answer. At 11:43 p.m., I called Evangeline. She answered on the 4th ring. Yes, I did not submit the resignation. Silence. I attended the appeal. I continued. They granted provisional eligibility. I know. Miriam copied me after the order. I should have called before. Yes. The word did not soften. I sat at the kitchen island and turned the ribbed cup between my hands. If you still want the communications role through the final hearing, I want you there. Do you want my strategy or my permission? My strategy? And personally? The plastic ribs pressed into my palm. I want to ask that after the authorization ends, her breath caught once, then I'll return for the hearing. A next step. A promise with a date. Horizon closed 2 days later. Evangeline's deputy team completed the signing ceremony using the crisis plan she had built. The board removed her from the live event lead, but promoted her to executive director of crisis strategy, giving her authority over the entire communications framework instead of a single transaction. She had not sacrificed her career for me. She had allowed other people to prove they could carry part of the work. Week 7 brought the formal occupational hearing. The room at regional headquarters held the people whose records now intersected. Miriam sat to my left. Evangeline sat beyond her with the communications chronology. Dr. Lena Park carried the certified environmental report. Dr. Naomi Chen had the cardiology studies. Adrian brought the original field binder. Dr. Samuel Ortiz chaired the occupational health review. Marcus sat across the table with his counsel. No one entered with a surprise solution. We built the case in order. Adrian testified that the team had worked 30 continuous hours and that the original roster documented the full deployment. Miriam introduced the altered digital file and its metadata. Lena presented the temperature and airflow readings from Hangar 4. Her report concluded that the fuselage environment created a foreseeable risk of exertional heat illness for a healthy worker. Dr. Chen separated the congenital valve irregularity from the collapse. Exercise testing, echocardiography, and Holter monitoring showed no operational impairment. Then I presented the exposure timeline, thermal imagery, APU, operating periods, hydration intervals, ventilation data, medical onset. The sequence showed cause without drama. At the end, Evangeline displayed the communications chronology Marcus had tried to create. Premature cardiac request, missing maintenance ticket, altered shift roster, chronic incapacity recommendation. She did not accuse him of motive. Miriam did. The environmental classification would trigger review of the deferred ventilation repair approved by Mr. Vale, she said. The medical classification transfers responsibility from the hangar to investigator ward. Marcus adjusted his glasses. The repair was an operational scheduling decision. Dr. Ortiz opened the preserved email. It was your decision. The Inspector General representative seated near the wall took notes. Dr. Ortiz issued a written provisional finding before the session ended. My collapse resulted from environmental heat exposure and excessive duty duration, not chronic incapacity. Field qualification would continue under monitored conditions for 30 days. Final restoration would follow successful completion. Marcus was removed from any further role in my review pending the audit. No instant triumph. A path back. Before we left, Evangeline signed the termination page for the communications authorization. Miriam countersigned. The professional role ended at 12:16 p.m. The medical proxy designation had already been withdrawn at my request after discharge. Evangeline held no authority over my care, employment, or appeal. At 2, Dr. Ortiz sent me to the hospital for final baseline vitals before the monitored return. Evangeline came because I asked her personally. The same nurse in blue scrubs entered the room with a blood pressure cuff and a ribbed plastic cup. She recognized us. "You look much better," she said. "I follow hydration schedules now." Evangeline glanced at me. Under protest, the nurse wrapped the cuff around my arm and looked toward Evangeline, who sat beside the bed in her cream cardigan. "You've been here through all of this," she said. "He's lucky to have a wife who advocates for him." The cup stayed steady in my hand. The communications authorization was closed. The medical proxy was closed. Horizon was closed. Nothing professional remained inside the answer. Evangeline looked at the nurse, then at me. "Not yet, but maybe someday." The nurse smiled and returned to the monitor. I set the water cup on the tray. "Dinner," I said. Evangeline's eyebrow lifted. "Is that a medical instruction?" "No. Friday night. After Dr. Ortiz releases me. No case files." "You may struggle with that condition. I will accept monitoring." She placed her hand over mine. "Yes?" The nurse pretended to study the blood pressure reading. Dinner came before week 8. At a restaurant near the hospital, Evangeline placed her phone face down. No agency calls. No Horizon calls. Aircraft incidents? Medical emergencies? We agreed on both exceptions. I checked the exit sign and aisle before opening the menu. "You inspected the room," she said. "Occupational habit. Then the site is cleared." For 30 minutes, we avoided Marcus, cardiology, and thermal data. She explained that her new role let her train the deputies who had completed Horizon without her. I admitted Adrian had named the team's hydration alert Ward Protocol. When the check arrived, we split it. Outside, she paused beneath the awning. I meant what I said to the nurse. "I know. You have not answered. Someday is acceptable." I said, "Dinner next Friday is measurable." She held out her hand. I took it. Week 8 tested whether the evidence could survive ordinary work. My monitored return began with a 6-hour deployment limit, mandatory hydration breaks, paired entry into confined aircraft spaces, and direct reporting to Dr. Ortiz. Hangar 4 remained closed until the ventilation repair passed independent inspection. Adrian met me at the replacement hangar with 2 water bottles and the clipboard. "You forget either one," he said. "I call Evangeline. She is not my supervisor. She is more frightening." I logged the first break at 90 minutes, the second at 3 hours. The assignment ended without symptoms. At the end of the week, Dr. Ortiz restored my full field deployment qualification with continuing duty hour limits and annual cardiac review. The agency adopted a heat exposure protocol for all accident teams. No investigator could exceed 16 continuous hours without command approval and documented relief. The Inspector General found that Marcus had concealed the deferred ventilation ticket and directed the roster alteration after my collapse. He lost oversight authority and received a formal disciplinary referral. Hangar 4 reopened only after the ventilation system was replaced. The practical loops closed. The final qualification letter arrived the next morning. Dr. Ortiz had signed it beneath the monitored return summary. Miriam forwarded the Inspector General notice confirming that Marcus no longer held authority over field reviews. Adrian sent a photograph of the new ventilation repair tag fixed beside the Hangar 4 control panel. I printed all 3 documents and aligned them on the kitchen island. Evangeline moved the final letter half an inch to the left. "It was crooked," she said. "It was centered." "You checked?" "Twice." She poured black coffee into 2 mugs and left the pages where she had moved them. I did not straighten them until she went to find her cardigan. Some habits survived progress. That Friday, Evangeline met me outside a restaurant wearing the same cream cardigan. "You kept it," I said. It is clothing. Emiliano. It has historical significance. It has a coffee stain. Also historical. She laughed and opened the door. 3 months after my qualification returned, the agency held a safety briefing inside the repaired Hangar 4. Lena presented the exposure limits. Adrian demonstrated the relief schedule. Dr. Ortiz reviewed the return-to-duty framework. Evangeline attended under a separate communications contract approved through procurement. Adrian stood beside the new ventilation controls. The investigator who documented this failure also completed every condition of his return. He told the team, "Afterward, I checked the airflow display." Evangeline waited behind the safety rail with 2 coffees. Normal? Above minimum. Hydration? Logged. She handed me the cup with oat milk. "You are difficult to supervise. You have no authority." I know. That difference mattered. 13 months later, rain moved across the windows of our shared apartment. My field jacket hung beside her cream cardigan in the entryway. A whiteboard near the kitchen listed my deployment limits, hydration schedule, and annual medical review date. I had checked the schedule twice since coming home. Evangeline saw me looking at it. "You completed every interval in Seattle," she said. I was verifying the record. "You were avoiding saying you missed me." I set my gear bag down. That interpretation lacked supporting data. She crossed the kitchen and poured black coffee into a ceramic mug, adding the small amount of oat milk I preferred. Beside it lay a silver apartment key and a signed notice terminating the lease on her old place. "My permanent address changed today," she said. "My salary account remains mine. Your field benefits remain yours. The household account starts next month after the bank finishes the paperwork." Practical independence inside a shared choice. She had already introduced me as her partner at the Horizon anniversary reception. Not emergency contact, not client, not investigator. Partner. I picked up the key. Near the pens on the counter, the old ribbed hospital cup held paper clips. One side still carried a shallow dent from my thumb. Evangeline slipped her arms around my waist. I checked the apartment lock over her shoulder. She waited. "1 turn," I said. "It was 1 turn yesterday." I was verifying the mechanism. "You were avoiding saying something again." I placed the key on my ring. "I'm home." The ribbed cup remained beside our coffee, no longer shaking in anyone's hand. The end. Closing thoughts. Core lesson. Trust becomes real when care, honesty, and practical action survive pressure without erasing either person's independence. Green flag. Healthy love respects professional boundaries, allows both people to choose freely, and never turns protection or career sacrifice into emotional debt. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.